Let's add a background to give some more context. So I could add this background to this composition, but to keep things a little bit cleaner, I'm going to take this Hero 2, drag it into a new composition, and now that's a pre-comp within this Hero 3 comp, which I'm going to retitle into our Hero Comp version 2. First, let's add a background. So I can take my shape tool, change it to the rectangle, let's turn off the stroke, change the fill to sort of like a light blue for the sky, something like that, and then double click. And now this is a shape layer. You could do this with a solid layer as well. And I'll just rename this to sky. Next, let's add a ground. So taking the rectangle tool, changing the color. I don't have anything selected in my timeline, so I can change the color to sort of like a brown or gray or something like that. And now let's create a rectangle down here. I'll rename this ground, and let's just I'll put it behind our hero, something like that. You'll notice that in my original version, there's like these stripes, which I thought just added a little bit more texture, made it look a little bit more well designed anyways. So what I can do is just take my rectangle 1, duplicate it. Let's change the color with that selected just to something a little bit lighter. And then now with this selected, I can just press down on my keyboard, shift down to move it down just a little bit. Let me duplicate it one more time. With that selected, I will change the color again, something maybe even darker. And then with it selected, shift down on my keyboard. Okay, so now we have sort of a layered ground, which I think looks good. Then let's add the buildings in the background. So take my rectangle tool, let's just pick gray, and let's just create sort of these buildings. And we can actually, change the colors and shapes, but we can make our superhero a little bit smaller if we want. Something like that looks pretty good. Oops, maybe like that. Okay. So now for some of these, let's just click in, change up the color just a little bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And let's put these behind our ground. I'll call this building. Okay. Now let's make our superhero just a little bit smaller. So press scale, change it to 75%. And let's put him on the ground still. So if we scrub through this, we can still see he does his sort of squat on the ground. And next we have to animate our background. So we want to have the ground and the buildings move down after he jumps up. And then we'll add some clouds to see that he's like flying through the air. First, let's parent the buildings to the ground. So just take the pick whip, parent it to the ground. So whatever happens to the ground happens to the buildings. Let's go right when he starts to leave, like when he would leave the ground, like something like there. Set a keyframe for position, and then go forward, depending on how fast our superhero flies, and drag down. And we can change this up, so let's play through this a little bit. That looks pretty good. We can add some easy ease just to give it a little bit more of a pop. That looks pretty good actually. And let's also add some motion blur to the ground and the building layer and enable it. Once the buildings and the ground leave the frame though, it's kind of hard to tell what this Superman is doing. Is he flying? Is he just stuck in the middle of the air? That's why we need to add more context with clouds. So what I'm going to do is take our ellipse tool, and we've created clouds before in this class, so you know how to do it. I'm not going to do it with a mask of a solid layer actually. I just want them to not be feathered. I just want them to have solid edges. So I'm just going to take the ellipse tool, create our cloud, just like so. I'll call this cloud 1. Now let's animate it. So this one we can have right about here. Press P to bring up position. move it up above our frame, and then go down or just forward in time just a little bit until you think it would be below our frame, and drag it below our frame. And we can play through it and see it. Did it go too fast? Yeah, it went way too fast. So let's extend these keyframes. Cool. Now, if we think, oh, well, we want that to appear a little bit earlier, we can just take this whole layer and drag to the left. Cool, right? And we probably want to add some motion blur to it, but while I'm building it out, I'm just going to leave motion blur off so that I can work a little bit faster. Okay, cool. So now what I can do is take my tool, my ellipse tool, and create another cloud. So let's just create maybe something that's a little bit bigger that will appear in front of our superhero, again, to give him just a little bit more context. Call it cloud 2. Move it in front like so. I'll put here cloud 1 behind our hero, and actually behind our buildings too. Not that it necessarily matters. Yep, no, it won't matter. And I can actually just copy and paste the position keyframes for this other one in front on this cloud. So here I can paste. So now I might have to adjust them. So if I press P and go to this first one, I gotta make sure that it's off the frame. And then go to this last one, and yeah, it's off the frame too. So let's just play through this. That looks pretty good. Now, the fastest way to sort of create more clouds based off of these two is to duplicate them. So if I press Command D for cloud 3, and then I press A to bring up the anchor point, I can move it to the left. And that doesn't mess up my position animation. Then I'll just take this layer and drag to the right. So it's happening a little bit later. Then I'll just duplicate cloud 1, press A to bring up the anchor point, drag it to the left. This one should be happening a little later, so I'll just drag the whole layer to the right in the timeline. Move it around like so. Awesome. And then just keep doing that. All right, so I've added a bunch. I think that's pretty good. Maybe we end our animation a little bit earlier. So let's just go in, and I'm going to close everything down. Make sure I have motion blur enabled for everything, except I'm not going to actually enable motion blur for our hero itself. And that looks pretty good. After watching this, I realized that he stands in his squat a little bit too long. So what I can do is go into our hero 2, open up our keyframes, and let's actually take these first 2 keyframes and drag them to the right so that the squat happens and it's a little bit shorter. Yeah, maybe even kind of just squats and then goes right into his leap. So we might want to just start this comp a little bit later, something like this. Awesome, now we have the basic motion of the background of our superhero. We're getting really close. Hopefully by now you understand. If you want, you can animate, a kneel down instead of the squat. That's perfectly fine to me. You could even animate a walk cycle of him walking in. You just have to animate the legs that way and move the torso from left to right, however you want. In the next lesson, what I'm going to do is add a couple more details, a little bit of movement to the cape, and then add that texture effect to make it look a little bit more designed.